Welcome back to Killer Stories. I'm your host, Bobby Holmes. For those of you watching on YouTube, you can see that I'm actually in color this week. Last week was more of a practice run, and I probably could have at least put some makeup on. I went with black and white to hide the fact that I didn't. This week, I have a story suggestion from a local Utahn. Mariana Rios wanted me to cover the case of Richard Chase, aka the Vampire of Sacramento. This man is the reason I keep my doors locked 24/7. You'll find out why soon enough. On top of the regular murder stuff, this episode discusses very disturbing descriptions of animal cruelty, cannibalism, and necrophilia. Some things I'm honestly going to have a hard time repeating. It's so vile. You have been warned. Richard Chase was born May 23, 1950 in Sacramento, California. It was difficult digging up any information on his younger years, but what I do know is that he was mentally and physically abused by his father. By the age of 10, Richard was already demonstrating the 3 factors of the McDonald triad. I've talked many times in previous episodes about typical behavior that serial killers exhibit as children. In 1963, psychiatrist J.M. McDonald wrote an article called The Threat to Kill that was published in the American Journal of Psychiatry. This information comes from the study and profiling of serial killers that was done by FBI agents John Douglas and Robert Ressler. If you watch Mindhunter, that would be who the characters Holden Ford and Bill Tench are based on. The McDonald triad consists of cruelty to animals, arson, and wetting the bed. These 3 things are linked to sexual predators and homicidal behavior. Richard Chase checked off all 3. At age 10, he was still consistently wetting the bed. Arson is typical in the adolescence of serial killers because it's a seemingly non-violent way of releasing aggression, a stepping stone. But then he moved up to collecting, torturing, and killing small animals. To suppress his aggression, Richard began experimenting with drugs. By the age of 18, he was a full-on alcoholic. He was regularly using marijuana and LSD. Richard was considered handsome in high school, and if you've seen pictures of him, you're probably doubting that statement. But it's true. His substance abuse was not kind to him, and it drastically changed his appearance. I've seen his high school photo. He looks like a totally different person. I'll post it to my social media for you guys. He had no trouble getting girlfriends. The problem was keeping them. He struggled with impotence. He later discovered that he did not have erectile dysfunction. He just simply wasn't aroused. Regular sex with a woman didn't do it for him. It was violence and death that got him off. The alcohol and drug use may have triggered something within Richard, or perhaps it's just his mental illness beginning to rear its ugly head. He became a severe hypochondriac. A lot of his concern seemed to be with his heart. He was constantly talking about how his heart would stop beating at times. He said that someone stole his pulmonary artery. I'm not sure how someone goes about stealing an artery. Richard was really into a Nazi UFO conspiracy, and he claimed that they were responsible. He also believed that his heart was shrinking and his blood was turning into powder. He believed his heart would continue shrinking until it disappeared, killing him. At this time, he was living with a couple of roommates. They grew tired of his over-the-top strange behavior. Richard would walk around naked in their apartment even if they had friends over. His roommates sat down and had an intervention with Richard. They asked him to move out, but he refused. So they moved out instead. Unable to pay the rent without any roommates, Richard moved back in with his parents. Not long after moving home, Richard had an outburst accusing his mother of trying to poison him. His father was already fed up, so he rented a 1-bedroom apartment for Richard to live in. With his newfound freedom, Richard was able to act out his fantasies, as well as testing home remedies to treat his heart condition. He believed that drinking blood was the only way to cure his shrinking heart. Outside of his apartment, he would hunt down small animals. Then he would eat their raw meat and put their organs into a blender with a splash of Coca-Cola to make smoothies. Richard believed that these smoothies were healing his body. The only thing I can think about is how many diseases he's contracting. Turns out he does get blood poisoning. To help keep his blood from turning into powder, he injected rabbit's blood into his veins. This was in 1975. Richard was admitted into a mental facility after the blood poisoning diagnosis. He wasn't there long before he escaped, but he didn't skip town or anything. He just went to his parents' house. They admitted him into an institution for the criminally insane. He continued his complaints about his shrinking heart and his powdery blood to the nursing staff, but no one took him seriously. On several occasions, they found him in his room with blood on his lips. When they asked him what happened, he said he cut himself shaving. But in reality, there were bars on the windows, and when the windows were open, birds would land on the windowsill. Well, Richard would grab the birds, snap their necks, and drink their blood. The staff at the institution referred to him as Dracula. After a year of therapy and antipsychotic medication, Richard was released back into society. He was doing so much better since he was on the medication. Once he was back home, his mother decided to wean him off of the drugs. He seemed back to normal, so she didn't see the need for it anymore. As you can imagine, once off the antipsychotic medication, the strange behavior returned. By this point, though, Richard was back to living in an apartment by himself. His personal hygiene went out the window. He didn't bother with bathing or brushing his teeth. He straight up stopped eating, with the exception of his catch of the day and his special smoothies. He dropped down to 145 pounds. Richard graduated from killing squirrels and rabbits to cats and dogs. He would torture them before he killed them. On occasion, he captured and killed his neighbor's pets. Once he called his neighbor and told them what he did. If my neighbor called me to tell me that he just tortured, murdered, and ate my dog, someone had better take over Killer Stories and write the story of Bobby Holmes. I know nowadays there are restrictions on purchasing guns, but apparently in the late 70s, even a man fresh out of a mental institution was able to buy a gun. Guns, actually, he bought several. Any and all spare time that Richard had was spent at target practice. One day, Richard paid a visit to his mother. She came to the door and found him holding a dead cat. He sets the cat on the ground, tore it open with his bare hands, and began rubbing the blood all over his face. I bet she was regretting weaning him off of that antipsychotic medication now. But if she felt any regret, she didn't act on it. Nobody stepped up to get Richard the help that he needed. Late summer of 1977, Nevada police stumble upon a car on the side of the road that was stuck in the sand. It was Richard's Ford Ranchero. There wasn't anyone at the truck, but you could see 2 guns on the front seat, as well as a plastic bucket full of blood and what seemed like organs. There was a pile of clothing with blood on it. The vehicle appeared to be a possible crime scene, so they started investigating. While looking around the desert through binoculars, they spot Richard Chase. He was running around naked with blood smeared all over his body. He noticed someone at his vehicle and took off running. He was on foot without clothing or shoes, so he didn't make it very far before police caught up to him. He told police that the blood on his body was his own, explaining that it seeped out through his skin. Further investigation determined that the organ in the bucket was a cow's liver. My research jumps from this incident to his first murder, so I have no idea if he was charged with anything for public indecency or killing of livestock. I mean, I imagine that's how he got the cow's liver. Richard apparently had plans to move on to killing people. His first murder seemed more like a practice run. There was no other motive or reasoning. You'll see what I mean when I get to his other victims. December 29th, 1977, 51-year-old Ambrose Griffin was helping his wife unload groceries from the car when Richard Chase shot and killed him while driving by. Richard did not know Ambrose. It was completely random. My guess is he just needed to see what it felt like to kill a human. Remember at the beginning of this episode when I told you Richard Chase is the reason that I keep my doors locked at all times? Well, it's because he took an unlocked door as an invitation to enter. The next part of Richard's crime spree involved breaking into homes. If you were smart enough to lock your door, he would just move on. He later stated that he knew that meant he wasn't welcome. But if your door was unlocked, he would walk right in. One of his earlier break-ins was to a home where a young couple lived with their baby. Luckily, they weren't home when Richard entered. He went upstairs to the baby's room where he urinated and defecated in the baby's blankets. As he walked back downstairs, the couple returned home and they were able to scare him away. January 23, 1978, Richard comes upon the home of Teresa Wallin. She was 22 years old and just happened to be 3 months pregnant. Richard enters the home, through an unlocked door of course, to see Teresa standing there holding a bag of garbage. She was about to take it outside. He pulls out a pistol and she drops the bag, throwing up her hands. Richard shoots her. It hits her in the palm of the hand. The bullet goes all the way through her arm and exits out the elbow. He fired again, hitting the top of her head. She falls to the ground, and Richard walks over to her and shoots her one last time in the temple. He drags Teresa's body back to the bedroom where he has sex with her corpse. During this act of necrophilia, Richard stabs her repeatedly in the abdomen. This is already level 10 horrible, but it gets worse. He digs through the trash and finds a yogurt container. He uses this to collect and drink Teresa's blood. Nothing about Richard Chase makes sense, but I just wonder why he didn't grab a glass from the kitchen cupboard. Teresa was found sliced open. Her intestines and spleen were removed. He cut out her kidneys and then placed them back into her body. He also cut off her left nipple. Worse yet, Richard goes into the backyard and grabs a pile of dog feces. He stuffs it into Teresa's mouth before leaving the home. Let's all just take a second to process that. January 27th, just 5 days after murdering Teresa Wallin, Richard enters the home of 28-year-old Evelyn Miroth. Evelyn had a 6-year-old son named Jason, and this particular day she was babysitting her nephew, 2-year-old David. A male friend of hers, Dan Meredith, had come over to keep her company. Jason had a play date with neighbor kids, but he never showed up, so one of his friends came over to check on him. She told her mom she thought she saw something moving inside, but nobody answered the door when she knocked. Her mother walked over to the Miroth home, and since the door was unlocked, she helped herself inside. To her horror, she sees Dan Meredith on the ground with a gunshot wound to his head, lying in a pool of his own blood. Evelyn was taking a bath when Richard Chase approached her. He shot her in the head, dragging her body to the bedroom, leaving behind a tub full of red water. Then he raped her corpse. Reports state that semen was found in her anus. Just like Teresa, Evelyn had been cut open and her intestines removed. He stabbed her nether region. I can't even repeat what Murderpedia described was done to her, so I'll just leave it at that. He cut her throat and attempted to remove one of her eyeballs. Evelyn's 6-year-old son, Jason, was found on the floor beside her bed with 2 gunshot wounds to the head. Evelyn's nephew that she was babysitting that day was nowhere to be found, but there was blood on the pillow where he had been napping. Turns out Richard had shot him in the head, took him to the bathroom where he cut the top of his skull off. He heard the knock at the door and panicked. He escaped in Dan Meredith's car, taking David's corpse with him. Once he was home, he decapitated David and ate his organs. Richard had left bloody shoe prints at both crime scenes, but this time investigators found a perfect handprint inside the home of Evelyn Miroth. Police went door to door asking questions and quickly came up with a lead. A woman who went to high school with Richard described an encounter with him at the mall. She hardly recognized him. He was lanky and pale, his face sunken in with dark circles around his eyes. He was wearing clothing that seemed to be blood-stained. They had a seemingly harmless conversation inside, and as she was walking to her car, she realized that he was following her. As he approached her, she quickly drove away. FBI agent Robert Ressler had profiled the killer of Teresa Wallin. He said that the suspect was more than likely a white male in his mid to late 20s. He had a history of mental illness and drug abuse, a loner who lives by himself and is unemployed or collecting disability, high school or college dropout who suffered from paranoid psychosis. And he was spot on. Police came to Richard's apartment and knocked on the door. His car was there, but he didn't answer. They drove around the corner to stake out his place, making it seem like they had left. Their plan worked. Richard eventually exited his apartment and walked towards his car. He put up quite a struggle for the police, but they were able to cuff him and get him in the back of a police car. When they arrested Richard, he was still covered in blood. He possessed a gun that matched the murder weapon, and Dan Meredith's wallet was in his back pocket. After his arrest, his home was searched. What they found was beyond disturbing. The inside of his apartment was quite literally covered in blood. The walls, the floor, the ceiling, and the entire kitchen. Inside his cupboards were drinking glasses and plates that were put away with dried blood stains on them. The blender smelled rotten and was obviously never properly cleaned after making his smoothies. Inside of his refrigerator, there were several containers with animal and human organs inside. On the table, there was a newspaper with ads selling puppies that were circled. There were 3 collars found inside, but no pets were in the home. While his home was searched, Richard Chase was detained and interviewed. Investigators tried their hardest to get him to confess, but the only thing he admitted to was killing a few dogs so he could drink their blood. For his heart condition. 22-month-old David's body wasn't found until March 24th. Nearly 2 months after his death. A janitor at a local church found a box, and inside of that box was a decapitated toddler and Dan Meredith's car keys. Even though the body was partially mummified, David's family was able to identify him by the clothes he was wearing that day. Richard Chase was charged with 6 counts of murder. The prosecutor for his case was going for the death penalty. Richard's defense team pled not guilty by reason of insanity. They argued that his murders were not premeditated. Richard was interviewed by over a dozen psychiatrists. Shockingly, they determined that he was sane and fit to stand trial. May 8, 1979, Richard Chase was found guilty of 6 counts of first-degree murder. His sentencing was capital punishment, death via the gas chamber. While awaiting his death sentence, Richard was interviewed by Agent Robert Ressler. Richard told him he didn't want to kill anyone. He only did it to stay alive. He needed their blood. I know he claims the whole shrinking heart and powdery blood thing, but what's with the necrophilia? The torture? Clearly these murders were more than just for cannibalism. There was a sexual gratification as well. He told Agent Ressler that it wasn't his fault. He blamed the Nazi UFOs for stealing his pulmonary artery, causing all of his health problems. To prove it, he asked Ressler to provide him with a radar gun. He would use it to catch the Nazi aliens so they could stand trial for the murders. Then, Richard stands up and empties his pockets that were filled with macaroni and cheese, handing it to Agent Ressler. He explained that his food was poisoned by the prison guards, that they were working together with the Nazis to try to kill him. Yeah, this guy sounds totally sane. I don't think I'll ever think of macaroni and cheese without that mental image. Richard was prescribed medication while in prison, but each day he held the pill in his mouth, went back to his cell, and spit it out. He collected them over the span of a few weeks. Instead of being put to death in the gas chamber, he decided to leave this world on his own terms. December 26, 1980, he died by overdose of the antidepressants he had been hoarding. Fun fact: an autopsy revealed that his heart was of normal size and showed no signs of disease, in case you were leaning towards the Nazi UFO theory. I knew of Richard Chase, but I was shocked reading the details of this case. It's one of those stories that just doesn't even seem real. But at the same time, I don't think you could make this shit up. Thanks for tuning in to Killer Stories. If you're enjoying the podcast, be sure to share it with your true crime-loving friends. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, which my stats show that most of you do, please leave me a review. It helps so much with the visibility of the show. You can leave a one-time donation at buymeacoffee.com/killerstories, or visit my Teespring merchandise store. The links for all those sites, as well as my YouTube channel and all of my social media, can be found on my link tree in the show notes. As always, thanks so much for listening. Until next time, this has been A Killer's Story.